Recording in progress.
Okay, so now we're at the part of our forum meeting where I can introduce our guest speaker this month. And I'd like to introduce someone I've known for quite a few months now. I call you a friend as well as a colleague, Jay. So Jay Shabat, I'll let you introduce yourself, your background, and also the topic that we're going to be covering today. So take it away.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Andrew. So yeah, briefly, my name is Jay Shabat, as Andrew mentioned. Thanks everybody for attending. So a little bit about me. I began my career working for an airline called US Airways, which isn't around anymore. They're merged with them. They're now American Airlines. Worked there for a few years, and I worked for Air France as well for a few years in the pricing, revenue management side. So that was my experience directly in the airline industry. But most of my career, for 16 years, in fact, I wrote a newsletter about the airline industry. Now, I focused on the passenger side of the industry. I know, this being a logistics conference, there's probably a lot of interest on the cargo side as well. That wasn't my area of expertise. It was passenger focused. So that's what I'm going to be speaking about today. Just briefly to sort of conclude my little bio here. After I wound up selling my newsletter in 2018, worked for the acquiring company for 2 years, and for the last year plus, I'm now writing a newsletter about the U.S. economy and another one about the North American railroad industry. That's a little bit about exciting me. So now moving on to the even more exciting.
Well, Jay, you have to share. What's the name of the one that you're doing for the U.S. Railroad industry called?
I'm not very creative with names. The airline one was Airline Weekly. The railroad one is Railroad Weekly. The economy one was Econ-Weekly. So easy to remember. Okay. I'm not terribly creative, but easy to remember. So.
Okay. No, yeah. That's fine. We can all remember that. Yes.
I think so. So yeah, let me pull up my presentation here. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work nice and smoothly. Can everybody see that?
That's there. We can see it. Yes.
All's well.
I would also suggest if we all kind of take off our video, then we'll get the full screen. Not sure. That we're not well, not necessarily you, Jay. You can keep your video on. We'll take ours off and should get a better picture. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll let you start.
Yeah. So if everybody's good, and just at any time, obviously interrupt if there's anything. I guess we'll do questions at the end, but if anything's burning to be asked, no worries about an interruption. But I'm going to speak about the U.S. airline industry as it stands today. Again, we're going to focus on the passenger side, and I have a few slides to go through. I'm not going to hit on every point, and some of them some of the points I may not even mention at all. But obviously, they're there for you to have a look at them. If you want to ask about any of them afterwards, that's kind of that's what I'm here for. But we'll breeze through. I'll try to hit on the major points and kind of give you a sense, sort of a 30,000-foot view of what's going on in the industry. If you were, I don't know, your backgrounds exactly. Some of you may, have some familiarity. Some may be new to the industry. But in any case, just some important takeaways that'll kind of give you a feel for what's going on right now. But before we do now, we're going to start with the past. If there's one thing I want everybody to know about the airline industry, it's that it is an absolutely lousy and miserable business, which isn't to say that there haven't been very successful airlines that have made a lot of money. It's not to say that there hasn't been entrepreneurs and people that have made good money. It's also not to say that there haven't been other people, non-airlines, making a lot of money off of airlines, selling things to airlines. The airline industry is a big ecosystem. There's a lot of players, everyone from the people that sell airlines, their airplanes, to the people that do their information technology, to the airports, and so on. So It's a very large industry, but it's also a very, if you're an airline yourself, it is a very difficult industry. The economics are very unforgiving. It's very capitally intensive. In other words, it requires a lot of money. It's also very labor intensive, requires a lot of people. And you're also at the mercy of pretty much anything that goes on that's bad in the world. So if you read some bad headline in the newspaper, chances are that's going to mess up an airline's business. And obviously the biggest and baddest example of that was the COVID-19 epidemic, which absolutely decimated the industry. It is a very cyclical business as well. I have this little chart here that just kind of, this is overgeneralizing a little bit, but just to give you a feel, I started in the airline industry right out of college in the late 1990s, and the industry at that time was very, very profitable. Fuel price, anybody know what oil prices we're trading at today? I haven't seen today's number, but any numbers out there you want to throw out?
Must probably 100, I would think.
About 100, yeah. So, anybody know what oil was in 1998? Anybody want to take a stab?
32.
Yeah, 32 is a good guess. For briefly, it was below 10. So you can see just the wild fluctuations. And we've even seen that. You don't even have to go back to the late 90s. I mean, right at the very, very worst of COVID, it was briefly, oil was trading actually at zero for a while. It was like, I think it was negative for a while. So now that was a kind of an extreme and extraordinary, unusual circumstance. But in any case, very, very, very volatile cost base for the airline industry. But then the 2010s was actually a pretty stable industry. I'm talking about the US airlines here specifically. And the reason for that stability had a lot to do with consolidation. There are other reasons as well. We used to call them the 3 C's, the consolidation, charging for everything, just ancillary revenues. I have to make it a C. And the other C was capacity cuts. There was just a lot of more capacity discipline. So a lot of reasons, but 2010s was, pretty good. And then, of course, the 2020s have just started off absolutely miserably because of COVID. Moving on to the next slide, just a few words about cost. I like to do, you can see I like my little, 3 C's, 3 P's. I'm going to say the 3 P's are very important when you're talking about airline costs. So one of them, I'm not sure if I have this, yeah, I do have this on the screen here at the bottom. People, planes, and petroleum. Again, I'm really talking about jet fuel there, but I have to come up with something that, it's to make the 3 P's work, I got to do something. So petroleum works, but you get the gist. I mean, those are the 3 biggest cost items. And there's, we won't go through unless anybody, later feel free to ask, but as far as people, the labor trends, won't really say too much about that now. There's been a lot of volatility in that over the course of the COVID crisis. As far as planes are surprisingly, the values of planes have surprisingly, they held up pretty well. If you want to get a typical Boeing 737 right now, which is, sort of the most common plane along with the Airbus A320 for, shorter journeys. We're not talking about, long haul overseas trips here. That's a different story. But for the, the most popular, what we call narrow body aircraft, it's actually not, the values are pretty firm. There's still a lot of demand, believe it or not. A lot of planes have been retired and whatnot. So the supply and demand balance didn't get too disrupted. And if we go to the next slide is on the revenue side and demand side, demand is actually very, very strong right now, not for all segments. So if you are an airline that has a lot of exposure to China, flying people from New York to China, for example, Los Angeles, China, that's basically, that's non-existent right now. And that's not coming back anytime soon. Longer term, we'll see. But China, believe it or not, was actually never too big of a market for the US airlines. China, I mean, one thing that I do, as I'm covering the economy, China is just. Anyway, oh.
Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can mute Tom's phone.
Is that a mute issue?
Yeah. Here we go. Okay.
We're good?
go
Yeah,
on.
no worries. So, so I was just mentioning about China. Japan also tough. Asia in general still tough. Anything domestic, especially leisure domestic. Florida, I can tell you, Miami is much busier now than it was even before the COVID crisis. That's the case. Cancun, Phoenix. Places with a lot of sunshine and just 2 years of really pent up demand that's really being unleashed right now. And even I was listening, Delta Airlines actually reported their first quarter financial results yesterday. And in their call, they seem to say that even though fuel prices are going up a lot, they're still able to get the pricing up to the point where they're going to make a lot of money in the second quarter. They did lose a lot of money in the first quarter, but that partially due to seasonal factors and whatever. We won't get into that, but it's going to be a very, very strong spring and summer. And you may have questions, do I think business passengers are coming back? Is Europe coming back? And, happy to field any of those in the Q&A. But I have here, you'll see a few points that I outline in this chart, that some of the business demand, corporate demand is a little bit slower to come back, but it is coming back. And even Europe too. Europe, Delta said yesterday that Europe is very much, people are booking. There's still some hesitancy because, people are afraid if they wind up testing positive for COVID over there, they might have trouble getting back and whatnot. But it is it's coming back. What they also said is that pretty much any time that a country relaxes their travel restrictions, whether it be Korea, Australia, somewhere in Europe, immediately Delta sees bookings go up. So the demand is definitely there. There is just one note about cargo. Cargo, as you guys probably know, extremely strong. So cargo really benefited a lot of, or few of the airlines quite substantially during the pandemic. It was a real lifesaver for some of them. In fact, some of them even continued to fly to places like Japan and even China because of the cargo demand. So they'd fly, with the seats would be empty, but they would fly with, very lucrative cargo, and it was worthwhile. So that's still holding up well. Now, not every U.S. airline even carries cargo, so it's just a select few. So a few other big points. The one probably most interesting thing on this slide is that there's a big kind of merger sweepstakes now in play. So Spirit Airlines, which is what we call an ultra low cost carrier. Some of you may have flown them. They're defined by this kind of business model, very successful business model, by the way, defined by very, very tight seating configurations, cram as many seats in the plane as possible, charging for absolutely everything, nickel and diming you here and there, but it's actually like I said, it's a business model that has been very successful. People like low prices. There's an old adage in the airline industry: low cost always wins. So, one of the ways you keep your costs low, or your unit costs very low in the airline industry, is that you cram a lot of units into the plane, and you do a lot of things like that to keep things low. So Spirit is now sort of the object of desire for two airlines. First, Frontier, I think it was in March, they made a bid to take it over, and Spirit agreed. But then JetBlue came in last week and said, no, we want it. We'll pay a little bit more. So we'll see, is Frontier going to make a counter bid? I don't know. Will Spirit, shareholders reject the JetBlue? I don't know. Hard to say, but it'd be interesting to play out. Now, JetBlue, interestingly, is not an ultra low cost carrier. Frontier is. So that'll be somewhat of add a layer of complexity to the integration if they wind up merging. So keep an eye on that. You may have heard about the regional pilot shortage, a few things. That's another thing I mentioned on here. And yes, and keep in mind, and sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place here, that the US economy does happen to be very strong right now, just in terms of the consumer demand, consumer spending. People have money in their pockets. Businesses are all-time record profits. So that is very helpful to airlines as well. Now, how long will the US economy stay healthy? There's certain things happening now that have some people worried. Federal Reserve raising interest rates, mortgage rates going up, et cetera. We don't know. Okay, So here I made a little chart for you, and these are this comes from a company called Cirium. And just full disclosure, I do some work for Cirium, but I've used them for many, many years, long before I did any work for them. But you can see here their statistics. This is by basically the number of seats that are scheduled for the second quarter, which is this current quarter, April, May, and June. Myrtle Beach is the top winner. They're up 39%. This is versus 2009 number of seats. So you can see these places are a lot busier than they were even before the pandemic. And all of them are pretty much, all the top ones you'll see, even if we extended this list down, are pretty much all leisure destinations. Now, Austin is a little bit different. Austin just happens to be the hottest economy in the United States. It's absolutely booming population-wise, and just all sorts of tech investment and foreign investment. And so that's sort of the Austin explanation. And Burbank, I believe, is Southwest Airlines started flying there. So don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the situation there. And then you can see on the other side, the losers, which is that list is interesting. So San Francisco, Portland, these are a lot of places that have been losing population during the pandemic, or they're places where companies are sort of a lot of people are working from home. They're not going downtown to the offices. So that's hurting the local economy. So yeah, and you'll see a lot of this population related, because I know San Francisco, of all the big major metros in the US, San Francisco has lost the most. San Francisco Metro, which includes San Jose, Silicon Valley, that whole metro has actually lost the largest percentage of population in the 12 months to July. So basically during the pandemic. So that's, you can see if you lose people, well, that's going to hurt your airline industry. So yeah, ask me any questions about that if you'd like. Here are just two quotations for all of you to take away. This is both of these are from March, and you can see both Delta's chief and American's chief saying very clearly that traffic is just very, very strong. It's that's, there's no two ways about that. Again, how long will it last? We'll see. And that comes to the end of my prepared remarks. That's, just a little bit more about me and where you can contact me. Feel free, by the way, to, shoot me an email or whatever. You'd like, always happy to, chat airlines, answer questions, whatever. So with that, I think we've got a hand up. So yeah, let's just go to Q&A unless you want to jump in, Andrew.
Well, only to invite everybody to put your, you can put your videos back on now. I think we can see each other. In fact, you can probably take off the slide, Jay. I just say thank you very much. That was a great summary. Let's kind of go through the questions. So we'll start with Jeff, and then we'll go to Adam's one that he posted.
Yeah, thanks. Comment, if you will, on Delta's refinery at Trainer, Pennsylvania. Because I've read articles saying that was the smartest thing they did, that was the dumbest thing they did, etc.
Right. So they did that back. It's I want to say almost 10 years now that they bought a refinery near Philadelphia. And the whole idea was, at the time they bought it, and I'm doing this from memory here, but so the refining spread, they call it the crack spread. So the difference between the oil price and then the actual price of jet fuel was very, very wide at the time. So the actual cost of just doing the refining, let alone the oil, was at the time very, very high. So they figured, well, if we do it ourselves, we can sort of, hedge against that. Over the years, it's been probably, my guess is, a net negative for them. Now, in 2015, actually late 2014, oil prices absolutely crashed. And they stayed pretty low for a couple of years. So I think in retrospect, they were kind of like, well, did we really need that? It's also, it's an added complexity for the business. They kind of manage it separately. So has it really been any kind of game changer for them or any? Hard to say. Now, what's happening now, of course, oil's going through the roof and crack spreads are going up from what I understand. perhaps there's some advantage there. But I think over the long term, it's been kind of a, meh, nothing too exciting. It's a good question though.
Thanks.
Yeah. Do they still own it, Jay? Did you say?
Yes. As far as I know, I think they're still have it. So yeah, some people I've heard in the past that there's talk that they may want to sell it, but as far as I know, they still own it. Yeah, and they used to, and I'm happy to check this for you if you shoot me an email, but they used to actually break out the refineries' financial results. They tell you, did it make money this quarter, did it lose money? My recollection is that most quarters it lost money. Yeah, I don't know if they still do that disclosure.
Okay. So Adam, you had two questions.
Yeah,
now.
sorry,
So
I'm
you've
being
got-
greedy. I just threw two in if I made just the second one. So yeah, Jay, thank you. That's fascinating. Really, really great to hear your insights on that. It was just interesting. I was thinking as you were mentioning about passenger numbers returning, and the CDC yesterday announced that they were extending the federal mask mandate for travel. I didn't know if there were any sort of inside stats that you might have been that I have in my head that there's a percentage of people who would really not want to travel either because they're wearing a mask, or even conversely may not wish to travel if people aren't wearing masks, if you know what I mean. And then just the second one was in the UK, we've had the Easter sort of break that's been taking place, and there's been sort of widespread disruption, loads of flights being cancelled, by and large as a result of, over the course of the pandemic, airlines laying staff off or asking them to rebid for contracts and that whole piece. That seems to have really bitten, but I've not read a huge amount about that here. Now, that's might be the fact that I've totally missed it. It is happening, but it doesn't seem to be the same thing. I'm just curious if you might advise what you might have an inside track on those 2 points, if that's okay, Jay.
Sure. Yeah, no, on mask first. And it's funny you said that because I was just talking to someone today that told me that, oh yeah, I was thinking about going to Florida, but who wants to wear a mask for all those things, So I think there's some of that. Again, demand is great. So it's obviously not deterring that many people. It's, and like you said, some people do like it. They feel comfortable. So, I haven't seen any stats, I haven't seen any opinion polls or anything like that. But is it a, material issue for demand? My hunch is no.
I suspect that might be the case.
Yeah, that's now as for like all these operational delays, I mean, it has been an issue in the States as well. I think, I don't know if maybe you've seen, I think JetBlue has been having some problems this week even. It's and this goes back to something you guys would, are all familiar with, just the supply chain, just the supply side of the economy, including labor, has just been so messed up. It's so, there's shortages of everything. And it's hurting the airline industry as well. Believe it or not, and I'll get to labor in a second, but believe it or not, there's even a shortage of airplanes. I mean, my friends at Boeing tell me, even wide body airplanes, my friends at Boeing tell me that, there are people out there, there are airlines out there that are clamoring right now for 787s. They can't get them. And that has to do with production delays, some of the same stuff that's happening throughout the economy. There's all sorts of, parts delays and this, and there may be some unique issues with Boeing and, I don't know, safety, I'm not sure, but yeah, that is an issue. And, during the pandemic, airlines just had to, let go a lot of people. Some of it was involuntary, but even the U.S. airlines, even here in the U.S., where there was like tremendous amount of federal aid, which was tied to keeping people employed, there were still a lot of workforce reductions. A lot of them were just early retirements, voluntary. So then suddenly you had this, demand just starts surging back. And then how do you hire enough people in a market where, I think the last I checked, there are 11 million job openings in the US and nobody, the companies can't fill them. So it's, it's creating a lot of operational disruptions. And, if everybody's going to Florida at the same time and all the planes are packed, I can tell you some family friends of ours, they went to Florida a couple of weeks ago during the school breaks here, and they had to drive back. Their flight got canceled. Absolutely no seats available. The airline said, okay, you got to wait for tomorrow or 2 days. They waited. Finally, they just rented a car and drove back. So
Oh, wow.
Just tight supply situation.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Wow. Yeah. Can I just have a supplementary around that first point about the mask wearing? I think is it April the 18th when it's the next decision date whether or not masks are going to be required in public
I
transport?
thought I read yesterday that, yeah, it was due to be at the end of, I think it's due to be this weekend. I'm sure I read, I might have got this wrong, that it's being extended until the first week of May. I thought, I'm pretty convinced
Yes,
I've read that.
that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Oh,
I've
is
seen
that right?
that. Yeah.
Okay, because the point I was going to say was there's one community that probably really will benefit from when that is dropped, and that's probably the flight attendants, the people that kind of have to police it, and it's the last thing they want on their job sheet, really. I think, Jay, and we've seen a lot of air rage incidents, but it's just an extra pain for them people to to have to deal with, as well as the fact that they're overworked because they're short-staffed in terms of the labour pool. That must be really challenging for them.
Agreed.
Just also on the labour side. So we know a lot of people kind of laid off and took early retirement. I mean, there's so many different types of jobs in the airline industry, from the people that just take the bags on and off right through to the pilots up in the front seat. I would imagine for ramp workers, the training period is not that long, but for pilots, presumably like train engineers and anybody else, it is a significant period of training. It's not a matter of just getting people off the street, and it's just is there poaching going on between airlines to try and take those pilots that are there already trained up?
Yeah, there's some of that, but poaching is very hard in the airline industry because a lot of your pay is a lot based on seniority. So if you work for 10 years, for United Airlines and you're ready to become a captain, and then suddenly you switch over to another airline, well, chances are you're going to get stapled to the bottom of seniority list, and so people tend to stay with their airlines, forever until retirement. That's not always. What you'll sometimes see for a while, this has totally changed, but for a while, there was a lot of movement. People would go over to work for people in the US or in the UK. They'd go over to work for a carrier in the Middle East, like one of the Gulf carriers, or where they were paying very well, or even in China or somewhere in Asia. That was typical. That's, forget about that now. But, there's some of that. Where you're really seeing shortages. So the structure of the airline is a little bit strange in that a lot of the shortest flights are actually outsourced to what we call regional airlines. And sometimes the big airlines own the regional airlines, and there's different, ownership structure. But basically, like most of these are independent companies. There's a couple of big ones. SkyWest is the biggest one. They're based in Utah, and they do a ton of flying for United and Delta and Alaska, and that's where you really see the pilot shortage, in those regional carriers right now. There's job openings at the big airlines, so they kind of get promoted up, and that's where pilots want to be. So that's a real issue right now, and a lot of regional. A lot of times when you read in the newspaper, so many flights are being canceled here and there. A lot of that, it looks like United or Delta. They're marketed under those names. But a lot of that is the regional carrier that's having issues. So, and there's a lot of, yeah.
Sorry, on that
Okay.
point on smaller airlines taking over some of those short haul flights, I think I read recently that there is also a trend rising with busing. They call it on the ground flights. And I think American Airlines was one of the latest ones to adopt that model for intercity travel. And so I guess my question is this something that might stay beyond the shortage of pilots and the rising fuel costs, or we'll see it go as soon as the outlook is a little more positive?
Yeah, it's a good question. Someone asked me the same question recently, ironically. So American is doing a little bit. It's very on the margins. There's just not. It works in a few places. I think American is doing it from Philadelphia to Allentown, which is an hour away or something like that. Think about out west, like where you guys are in Texas. I mean, are people really going to take a bus from Dallas to Houston, from Dallas? I mean, you guys know the geography better, but it's it's probably just niche. And remember, I mean, there's a bus driver shortage too. You know, it's not so easy to find bus drivers. Buses use fuel also, you know, so that's expensive. So I think it's somewhat limited. You know, there are people out there who you know, think it's perhaps has more potential than me, but yeah, I think more of a niche thing. That's a good question.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, it's probably easier to get a bus driver than a regional jet pilot, actually, Jay.
Nowadays, yeah. Yeah, you're probably right about that. But yeah, no, I
Harder
think about
learning
it.
curve,
You
but
know,
we still don't have people applying. Recruiting is still an issue. And the company that I read of in the last couple of weeks, serving out of Philadelphia, and it may be Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, I think Atlantic City. I believe the company is called Landline, if I remember
Okay.
correctly.
yeah, okay. Yeah,
That's
and I'm
right.
not sure if it's them, but they've done some work up in Minnesota too for an airline called Sun Country. Is that
Yeah.
them?
Sun Country was mentioned. I don't remember the locations, but that makes sense. That's where Sun Country is.
Well, guys, let me tell you. So you obviously weren't attending last year's Outlook conference when David Lund, who's the chief executive of Landline, was one of our speakers. So yeah, so they worked with Sun Country for a few years, and they have feeders from all these different little towns, Duluth, I think, all outside of Minneapolis, feeding in. They then got business with United out of Denver, going to a couple of ski resort locations. And then American is their third airline partnership that they've really pulled together.
Well, I'm glad he's not here because he probably wouldn't appreciate my pessimism, but there probably are some niche things. I mean, the Denver to the ski resorts, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's niche. But you mentioned Texas. So, you know, out of Dallas, there's, I think, American fly to about 7 destinations that are less than 200 miles away with regional jets. You know, some army bases, things like that, which have a regional airport. And, you know, with the shortage, not just pilots, but aircraft as well, and slots at certain airports. You know, I think it might be a larger niche, but you know, also multimodal transportation in the US is not like it is in Europe, where it's normal to get a coach or a bus or a train to actually connect to a flight. In fact, you know, it's usually safer than risking the road conditions.
I think these buses are doing interline baggage and ticketing though, so they're trying to really step up their game. I remember Icelandair had a code share arrangement with Amtrak on the East Coast, you know, because they would serve like JFK in Baltimore, but this way they could serve Philadelphia and so forth. So there's lots of little neat ideas like that.
Yeah.
Well, I believe Landline is connecting within the terminal, within security. And I believe bringing people into Philly, security and baggage has already been cleared and checked, and they're delivering to the secure side. I mean, if I had to make a connection in Dallas to go to Waco or even Oklahoma City, you know, when I think about the connections I've made over the years, and I always allow extra time for connections. If there was a bus, I'd probably do that. Now, remember, I'm speaking as someone who used to drive them, but you know, part of it would depend on the equipment. Part of it would depend on the equipment.
Yeah, I would do it. I mean, the only thing I'd add is they are a lot of these routes that we're talking about them. They're pretty small routes. So Allentown, Philadelphia, you know, you're really not talking to, you know, how many people a day actually do that.
Yeah.
So the question is, how many buses can you realistically schedule between those two cities? And, you know, you get into, you know, just issues of convenience. And but no, I mean, I certainly would. Yeah, I'd have no problem jumping on a bus to make an airline connections. I mean, yeah, I've done it in Europe all the time and other places and in Asia.
No, absolutely. But sorry, Adam, I just saw, you know, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I need to dash. So thanks all. I'll let you carry on, and I'll catch up with you video later. Yeah. Take care. Bye now.
So listen, just to close out the landline comment or discussion, it's always interesting to look on their website. They now offer a different size vehicles. So right from kind of like town cars through
Oh,
to
okay.
minibuses to larger buses. And, you know, it's very sophisticated up in Minneapolis. And I think they offer more frequency than you'd ever get with a regional jet service. So for me, it was just a fascinating model. Maybe because a bit like Arthur, I come from that road passenger transport background, and always see opportunities in the US where it's often non-existent. So it's anyway, sorry, I guess we ought to say when we're coming up to towards the end of the session, any other questions for Jay?
Yeah,
Well,
Jay, regarding the potential JetBlue Spirit transaction, do you see them as still separate carriers with separate levels of service? Do you see JetBlue bringing Spirit up in service quality? Full disclosure, I've never flown Spirit. I live on American. But do you see them bringing Spirit up or JetBlue down? What are your thoughts at this point?
Yeah, good question. And my initial reaction actually was that it probably would have been a good idea to keep them separate, to run sort of two separate business models and preserve Spirit's low cost. They don't plan to do that. And my guess is the biggest reason is that it's very hard to do that with the unions. So they don't want, if you've got one airline, one management, they don't want a separate group of employees, working at one airline, another working. They want everything integrated. So the plan appears to be, and everything is still in flux, once I'm sure they're still working this through. But what they've initially said is that everything is basically going to be JetBlue service. The planes will be repainted. They'll rip out some seats so you get more leg room. All the workers will be, put up to the JetBlue contracts. So Spirit will essentially be no more. Now that'll take a few years to, that transition. So yeah, that's the plan.
Okay. So Jay, do you think anyone else is going to step in? Now Spirit seem to be this much fancied suitor.
No, because there's really not that many people left. The big, forget about, we call the big three, American, Delta, United. They wouldn't even, it's a very big question of whether or not the Justice Department, or I guess the relevant authority, whoever the relevant competition authority is here, is not going to allow this. JetBlue is also trying to get Justice Department approval for an alliance with American, and the sort of the atmosphere right now and the sort of the environment right now on this kind of competition issues is very tense. There's sort of a bias, not a bias, but a sort of proclivity in the Biden administration to not let things get too over consolidated. Consolidated. So it might be a heavy lift to get certainly both of these done. So you can forget about, American, United, Delta. They're not going to step in. That would be, that would definitely raise red flags. So you ask who's left. Alaska, they're not really interested because they're more focused on the West Coast, and they swallowed another airline called Virgin America, and that was a bit of a tough swallow for them. Allegiant is another ultra low cost carrier. They have a completely unique business model. They want nothing to do with any of these. That's a fascinating business model in of itself. We can do a whole another webinar on that, but they wouldn't be interested. Sun Country is probably, they're too small to swallow someone that much larger. So really, it's really JetBlue, Frontier.
I believe, Jay, it couldn't be a foreign carrier because isn't there an ownership?
I was just going to say, yeah, there's foreign, basically foreign airline can't own, I think, like 20% of an airline, or it might be higher, the actual number of shares you can own, but in terms of what you can exercise, managerial control, it's, I think 20% is the number. So the foreigners, you can forget that too.
So much for WestJet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, and they got WestJet just got taken over right before a couple months before the pandemic, I think. Whoops.
Well, I was thinking of Viva Aerobus or someone like that, but of course, US carriers have been buying stakes in Mexican and South American carriers, Avianca, for example. And
right, and there are different rules in different countries, but a lot of those are small stakes. They're strategic stakes. You know, like Delta has a pretty sizable stake in South America's biggest carrier called LATAM, and that's for strategic reasons. They're not ever looking to, totally control the airline or buy 100% of it. They just wanted to, we can want to go too far into down that rabbit hole, but, LATAM was aligned with American. Delta wanted to kind of steal them away. So they offered to basically buy their shares and whatever. So it's cross-border consolidation in the airline industry gets really tricky. You don't really see too much of it. Within Europe, you do, France and Germany, but that's because from an aviation regulatory perspective, Europe is basically one. I haven't seen the latest, but I think even the UK is still part of, even though they're not part of the European Union anymore, they're still part of the
EASA.
Yeah. So it gets, that's a different story. There's been a lot of consolidation within Europe, but the cross-border mergers, they're few and far between in the industry. So yeah, maybe there's always some non-airline that can come in, maybe some wealthy investor or some,
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
There you go.
After Twitter, he'll buy all the airlines.
Now you remember the old joke though, how do you make a small fortune in the airline industry?
Yeah. Start with a large one. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned demand coming back and shifting from business travel, which is what I'm used to a leisure model, which also implies different types of destinations. How is capacity recovering to this demand? Because capacity, of course, was significantly decreased during COVID, with the lead time, particularly for flight crews, as well as equipment, unless they resurrect stuff out of the desert. With that lead time, how do you see capacity recovering? Where are we now? I really haven't been traveling or flying during COVID, just because my business went to hell. But where are we and where are we going with capacity?
Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm sorry, I don't have an exact number for you, but I can tell you that capacity is still not fully back to where it was pre-COVID. My guess is about 80-90% to where it was. Now, there are some airlines that are much larger today than they were in 2019. That's true of most of the low-cost carriers. So most of the ultra low-cost carriers, Spirit, Frontier, some of the smaller ones. Now, Delta, on the other end of the scale, is the one that's come back the least, so to speak. They're down maybe 70 or 80% restored. So it's not back yet. Now, in a lot of cases, you don't have to pull planes out of the desert. You just increase utilization. Now, we didn't talk about it, but on my slide, I mentioned that one of the cost issues everything in the airline game is about unit cost. It's you lowering your cost per unit. We call it ASMs, basically. The amount that basically cost you to fly one seat, 1 mile. So right now, because demand is less, they're utilizing aircraft less than they were. This was especially true in the wide bodies because there is no demand to China. There is no demand to Japan. So those wide bodies are they're not getting a lot of use. They're sitting on the ground for long periods of time. So as demand comes back, you just turn that utilization button off. You turn that lever. There are some planes coming out of the desert. The leasing market is very active. So it's true if you call up Boeing and you say, I want a new 737, that's going to take some time to build. But you can call up, something like 50% of all planes right now are leased rather than owned. So you can call up a big leasing company like AirCap happens to be the biggest one. They just bought GE's leasing company recently, and say, hey, I need some planes. I got demand is going to be, my bookings are coming in really strong. I need something for this summer, and they'll get you planes. Sometimes they'll take them from, take them from China where there is no demand right now, or they'll take them from, some weak market. So there's a lot of fungibility. The great, we talk about how miserable the economics of the airline industry is, but one nice thing about it is that you can move assets around very easily, much more easily than you can, say, a factory, So Florida's booming, fine, just bring Florida's booming, San Francisco's not, take some planes from San Francisco, put them in Florida. So it's, you can do it.
So is the crew supply keeping up?
Well, that's much more of an issue. That's harder. And that's, the right question to ask. So, they're trying and they're hiring, but they're, we've seen from cancellations, like we talked about before, that can be tricky.
Yeah.
I was reading how American decided to retire their 757s and A330s, and then the 787 production stopped because of FAA problems. And so now they're really gritting their teeth. And of course, it's crazy to try to bring the old planes back, all the inspections and the crew are no longer qualified and all that stuff. So they're just toughing it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Boeing's had a lot of production problems even before pandemic. They, with the 787, great, fantastic airplane, probably the best wide body out there in terms of economics. But yeah, they've definitely a lot of production delays and issues, having to rewire stuff and this and that. Of course, everybody's familiar with the B737 MAX issue. That's the smaller plane. That's back flying again, and that's another fantastic aircraft in terms of the economics. I mean, airlines love it. But the fact is, you have a duopoly essentially in the aircraft. It's Airbus or it's Boeing. That's it.
So, we may see some Tupolevs available.
Oh, yeah, there you go. I don't know if the State Department will let you buy any, but
yeah. Well,
I've actually flown on a Russian aircraft once. Yeah, it was fun.
Chickens.
Yes. Well, me too. But that's because I'm a airplane geek. So I kind of, the Ilyushins and Tupolovs and Yakovlevs. So, So Jay, we've kind of gone a little over our time, so we've got some bonus material from you without asking permission. So I'd just like to really say thank you so much for preparing the talk today. And I think we probably had more questions than even on your talk. So it just proves what a fascinating kind of topic this is, and kind of how informed you are of what's going on. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you for that. And we'll get this posted up. So please, if you think other people that have missed today would benefit from this, let them know what a great session it was, and we'll share the link. So thanks again, Jay. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And yeah, thanks to you guys. And yeah, always feel free to contact if you just want to chat or have any questions about the always exciting airline industry.
Will do. Never a dull moment, eh?
Never a dull moment.
All right. Well, everyone. So just a final plug. Next one is going to be May the 12th, and we have another speaker, Rob McCanney, who's going to talk about microtransit. I can assure you it's probably more exciting than you could imagine, and it's very, very relevant to us. And the case study that they're talking about is one I know quite well. It's actually in one of the Dallas suburbs. Fascinating about the future of public transit and mobility. So hopefully see you all again in a month's time. Okay, have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.